In 1911, giant bones were found in Lovelock Cave and skeletons that measured between 7 and 8 feet in height.
What if everything we thought we knew about ancient America was wrong? In 1911, two brothers digging near Lake Delavan, Wisconsin, unearthed something so strange it made national headlines. They claimed to have discovered 18 giant skeletons with features so bizarre they didn't fit any known race. Then, suddenly, the story vanished. No photos, no museum exhibits, just a trail of reports, and then silence. Over a century later, the truth behind what they found is finally coming to light, and it's far more disturbing than anyone expected. The dig that wasn't supposed to happen. In the early months of 1911, the Phillips brothers, Ernest and Chester, were not trained archaeologists or scientists. They were local hotel proprietors who decided, out of curiosity, to dig into a large conical mound near their family property. This was not some small patch of land, but a sizable site near Lake Lawn, surrounded by a rich and often overlooked legacy of Native American effigy mounds. What they found, just a few feet below the surface, would soon capture the attention of newspapers and researchers across the country.
There's several very strange stories of these dead corpses or skeletons being found.
The mound they chose to excavate was not random. It was one of many that dotted the Lake Delavan region, a place where reports suggested hundreds of ancient burial sites once stood. The mound itself measured nearly 40 feet across, and 6 feet beneath the surface, the brothers discovered a burial chamber. The floor of that chamber was layered with gravel, white sand, and blue clay. According to first-hand accounts, these materials had been carefully placed to drain water away from the tomb, preserving whatever was buried inside. That level of engineering alone was surprising for its time, and it raised immediate questions about who had built the mound and why such care had been taken. What came next was even more startling. Inside the chamber, the brothers uncovered 14 skeletons, several with fractured skulls that suggested violence. Others posed in unusual positions. Most were laid on their backs with knees bent and arms raised, but 2 were found seated. Each body told a different story, but they shared one thing in common. They were abnormally large. Reports from the time described them as standing between 7 and 9 feet tall, with strange features that defied categorization. Some had low, sloping foreheads and unusually large jaws. The nasal bones were prominent, and the skulls extended backward in a way that didn't resemble anything in modern anthropology. Word of the discovery spread quickly. The Delavan Republican published the story, and even the New York Times eventually picked it up. Locals were fascinated, and many were convinced that this was proof of a prehistoric race, something entirely separate from the Native American cultures they had always been told about. The excitement wasn't limited to folklore enthusiasts either. Archaeological societies, including those connected to Beloit College, took an interest. But instead of leading to widespread research, the story started to take a darker turn.
They're bringing bones or parts of family members to new locations.
Records of what was found began to disappear. There were no confirmed photographs, no museum acquisitions, and no follow-up publications with concrete evidence. The Phillips brothers were reportedly congratulated for their work, and then the trail grew cold. Where did the skeletons go? Why wasn't the discovery preserved, or at least documented in full by a professional institution? What makes the story even more curious is what happened to the other mounds. Just decades before the Phillips brothers' dig, many mounds in the area were leveled to make way for farmland, homes, and golf courses. As urban development spread across southern Wisconsin, the majority of these ancient burial sites were wiped from the map. Some say it was ignorance. Others believe it was part of something more deliberate. The more mounds disappeared, the easier it became to erase the context that might have helped us understand who, or what, those skeletons really were. Was it just carelessness that led to these sites being destroyed, or was there a reason some stories had to be buried along with the bones? Anatomy of an anomaly. When archaeologists stumble upon human remains, there is usually a process. Bones are measured, catalogued, and carefully documented before being handed off to specialists. But with the Lake Delavan skeletons, nothing followed that standard. The remains were described in newspapers, whispered about in academic circles, and then quietly disappeared. Still, the few descriptions that remain paint a deeply unsettling picture. These were not ordinary humans, and that is where the controversy begins. The Phillips brothers, though not scientists, were clear in their reports. They spoke of skeletons that towered over modern men, some estimated to stand nearly 9 feet tall if fully fleshed. The skulls were especially strange. From the brow ridge, the craniums sloped backward sharply, far more than what is typically seen in any human group. The nasal bones were high, the cheekbones pronounced, and the jaws strong and angular. But perhaps the most bizarre detail was the teeth. Instead of the expected arrangement, incisors in front and molars in back, some skeletons were said to have regular molars positioned where front teeth should be. That detail has baffled researchers and fueled speculation ever since. One theory suggests these giants were part of an ancient, unknown race, one that lived long before Native American tribes settled in the region. If true, this would force a complete rethinking of pre-Columbian history. But even this theory doesn't fully explain the burial methods. Why were some bodies laid in seated positions? Why the complex layering of sand and clay? And why were the remains embedded in charcoal? It almost suggests an effort to preserve or sanctify the dead, as though these were not simply burials but ritualistic interments. Modern anthropology has no easy answer for these traits. Some say the skull shapes might be the result of cranial deformation, a practice found in several ancient cultures, but even that fails to explain the overall size of the bones. The long femurs, the oversized jawbones, and the sheer scale of the burial chambers don't align with any documented group. If these remains were misidentified or exaggerated, where is the correction? Why has no museum or university come forward with rebuttal evidence or counter-studies? The deeper question may be why this case fell into obscurity so quickly. A discovery of this magnitude should have launched a wave of scholarly debate. Instead, it was pushed into the margins of folklore. The Wisconsin Historical Society, the State Museum, and even Beloit College, organizations that initially expressed interest, have little to no record of the event today. For decades, even local residents had no idea that something so unusual was once pulled from the ground just yards from the Lake Lawn Hotel. As reports from that era faded, so did the public's memory of the giants. But the physical anomalies described in those early accounts refuse to go away. They match similar discoveries from across North America, where unusually large skeletons with oddly shaped skulls were found in burial mounds, only to be lost, destroyed, or discredited. This pattern has repeated itself too many times to be dismissed as coincidence. Could it be that the skeletons discovered in Wisconsin were not unique? Were they part of a broader phenomenon that we have only begun to understand? What the mounds were hiding. Long before the Phillips brothers took a shovel to the soft earth at Lake Delavan, the land had already spoken in silence for centuries. The rolling hills and strange rises were not natural. They were effigy mounds, earthworks created with purpose, often shaped like animals and spread across the landscape like hidden messages. In southern Wisconsin, these formations once numbered in the hundreds of thousands, and archaeologists have long attributed them to the woodland cultures, specifically the late woodland period, which lasted from about 1500 to 900 years ago. These were not crude piles of soil. They were ceremonial platforms, tombs and symbols etched into the land with mathematical precision. The mounds around Lake Delavan were no exception. Early surveys described them as conical, some shaped like turtles or birds, and others completely unidentifiable in form. They varied in size, with many around 4 feet high and up to 150 feet long. Their alignment, structure, and placement suggest they were more than burial sites. They appear to have been arranged according to celestial patterns, possibly connected to seasonal rituals or beliefs about the afterlife. Whatever the case, there was no question that the mounds carried deep cultural significance. But there's something odd about the mounds that once stood near Lake Lawn. Many of them vanished before proper excavation could even begin. Some were flattened by farmers who saw them as obstacles to plowing. Others were destroyed during development, turned into foundations for houses, roads, or in this case, a golf course. The result is that one of the most significant burial mound sites in southeastern Wisconsin was gradually erased without a clear record. And that destruction didn't just impact archaeology, it disrupted the story, one that might have explained why 18 massive skeletons were buried beneath that soil in the first place. The Phillips brothers' discovery in 1911 took place at the edge of that vanishing history. According to reports at the time, the mound they opened was carefully built, with gravel, clay, and sand layers forming the floor and ceiling. The chamber itself was almost exactly 7 by 9 feet, a rectangle just large enough to hold several bodies, though in this case it held more than a dozen. And unlike typical burials, these were not positioned uniformly. Most of the skeletons were on their backs, but some had bent knees and raised arms, and 2 were sitting upright as if left to contemplate eternity from within their underground tomb. To those who study indigenous history, these details are worth noting. The use of clay to waterproof the tomb, the inclusion of shells and artifacts, and the intentional construction of such chambers all suggest a people with knowledge and reverence for the dead. But there is also a lingering disconnect. None of the known Native American groups from this region have burial traditions that match the scale and anatomical anomalies of what was found. When anthropologists examined the reports, some as early as 1912, they noticed that while the mounds matched woodland culture, the skeletons did not. It was as if someone had borrowed sacred land to bury a completely different species. And then the trail vanished. The Wisconsin Historical Society took note of the event. The University of Chicago reportedly sent representatives to investigate similar mounds nearby, but none of these institutions retained the skeletons, or at least none of them claimed to. After submitting a report to the Wisconsin Archaeological Society, Ernest Phillips and his brother seemingly faded from the story. Their hotel still stands, and the golf course where the mounds once sat remains in use, but there is no plaque, no museum exhibit, and no formal recognition of what was found there. That silence is not due to lack of interest, it's something else. Throughout the 20th century, similar discoveries were made across North America, from West Virginia to Nevada to the upper Midwest. There are reports of oversized skeletons with unusual skulls and strange dental features buried in mounds, caves, or forgotten chambers. In most cases, the bones are either lost, discredited, or quietly removed. Sometimes it's due to the difficulty of preservation, especially in the early 1900s. Sometimes it's because of ethical shifts around the treatment of indigenous remains. But in the case of Lake Delavan, the disappearance is especially suspicious. According to an interview conducted in 2004 with a local historian, the 2 largest skeletons found at Lake Delavan were taken to a nearby house. The Phillips brothers reportedly coated the bones in shellac to preserve them, but after their deaths, the skeletons weren't included in any estate sale. They simply vanished. If the story ended there, it might be written off as a family curiosity lost to time. But this has happened too many times, in too many places, with too many similarities. Who were these people? And why were they buried in one of the most elaborate mound systems in the Midwest? Bones that didn't belong to us. When the Phillips brothers unearthed the skeletons in 1911, they were expecting to find remnants of the region's woodland culture. What they found, instead, confounded every expectation. The bodies buried beneath the mounds were unlike anything typically associated with Native American archaeological sites. Reports from the time described skeletons of towering stature, some estimated between 7 to 9 feet tall, with skulls that looked completely out of place in any textbook on human evolution. The most shocking detail was the shape of the heads. These skulls sloped backward from directly above the eyes, creating an almost conical shape that bore no resemblance to normal human anatomy. The nasal bones were unusually pronounced, jutting far above the cheekbones, and the jaws were long, narrow, and came to a pointed chin. In some cases, the teeth didn't follow typical human dental patterns either. Instead of flat incisors or sharp canines, the front teeth were shaped more like molars, wide, blunt, and set deeply into elongated jaws. Descriptions like these might sound exaggerated or misinterpreted, but they weren't taken from fringe blogs or conspiracy theorists. These were accounts published in respected newspapers at the time, including the New York Times and several regional Wisconsin outlets. The reports even included commentary from members of the Wisconsin Archaeological Society and noted local historians. These were not wild claims made in isolation, they were part of a larger, coordinated investigation that, for reasons still unknown, seemed to fade quietly from the public eye. But why would these physical anomalies matter so much? For starters, the idea of an entirely unknown race of giant-sized humans would fundamentally challenge everything we believe about prehistoric North America. The prevailing view holds that the Americas were populated by migrants from Asia via the Bering Land Bridge, and that the subsequent cultural developments, from the Clovis people to the Mississippian mound builders, were all descended from these early migrants. There's no room in that model for 9-foot humanoids with strange skulls and unusual bone density. And yet, the physical descriptions of the Delavan skeletons don't stand alone. Across the United States, similar features have been reported in other burial mounds, including skulls with double rows of teeth, oversized cranial capacity, and even 6-fingered hands in rare cases. Skeptics might dismiss these accounts as exaggerated or the result of poor excavation methods, but the consistency across time, location, and researchers makes it difficult to wave away entirely. The Delavan skeletons were reportedly embedded in layers of charcoal and sealed with blue clay, a technique that suggests advanced burial practices and intentional preservation. If these were merely large men from a tall tribe, why take such careful steps to protect the remains? Why build complex, multi-layered chambers in a mound shaped like a ceremonial effigy? Why align these mounds with natural features or celestial bodies? The care and precision used in these burials suggest reverence and cultural significance. But for whom? One of the most startling aspects of the burial was the presence of fractured skulls among several of the skeletons. The break patterns weren't consistent with accidental damage or collapse. They appeared deliberate, blunt force trauma, possibly from warfare or ritual sacrifice. This adds another layer to the mystery. Were these giant individuals warriors, outcasts, leaders, or something else entirely? And if they were killed, who had the strength or motivation to do so? More unsettling is what happened to the remains after their discovery. As reported in a 2004 interview with a local historian, the 2 largest skeletons were taken to a private residence and coated in shellac to preserve them. After the deaths of the Phillips brothers, these remains disappeared. No records, no photographs, not even rumors of who might have them. This is not uncommon in the broader story of oversized skeleton discoveries in America. Time and again, bones are uncovered, reported, and then promptly vanish without explanation. In some cases, institutions like the Smithsonian have been accused of quietly absorbing and hiding these anomalies to preserve accepted scientific narratives. Whether or not this suppression is deliberate, the pattern itself is impossible to ignore. Local farmers, amateur archaeologists, and even academics have all stumbled upon skeletons that defy logic, only to watch them disappear into private collections or institutional vaults. The story always ends the same way, with missing bones and unanswered questions. This creates a strange limbo between history and mythology. Are these skeletons real evidence of a forgotten chapter of human history, or are they the product of exaggerated folklore and bad science? If we take the original reports at face value, then we are faced with a staggering conclusion. North America may have once been home to a population of human-like giants with anatomies that don't match our species, buried with care and reverence, and then forgotten by time. Lost and buried for a reason? The story of the Delavan skeletons doesn't stand alone. Similar discoveries have been reported in Ohio, New York, West Virginia, and dozens of other states, each pointing to a lost chapter of ancient American history. But each time, the same eerie pattern emerges. Bones vanish, photographs are never taken, artifacts disappear into private hands or museum basements, never to be studied again. Some say it's about protecting scientific orthodoxy. Others believe it's about respecting indigenous burial grounds. But there's also a darker theory, that the truth was never meant to surface. that these discoveries might point to a race or a people whose origins contradict everything we think we know. If one discovery like Delavan could change our understanding of history forever, imagine what hundreds of buried stories could reveal. So why does it always end the same way? The mystery of the 18 giant skeletons found in Wisconsin may never get the spotlight it deserves, but each detail, each strange report keeps the curiosity alive. Were they giants, warriors, or simply misinterpreted remnants of a forgotten people? The truth might still be buried somewhere beneath the soil, waiting for someone brave enough to dig a little deeper.